week 3, right? Is it? Are we there? Yeah, we are there. Okay. Am I on connection? Yeah. Okay, so I already made a lot of changes to my own so that I could actually talk to you and show you those changes. But I also did them locally. I downloaded the whole thing from my code sandbox and I have it locally, so I can actually, because I think maybe here might be a bit easier to see, I don't know, than on code sandbox. Yeah. I'm not sure, but I'll use this one, which if I start it, okay. So I will go through a small overview. Again, I'm still using the same Git home type of thing. But now, inside of my repositories component, again, the header, let's start from the beginning. So our Git home returns a div with 2 components inside, right? And then we have one called header that takes a name called Git home. Now, this header one, I will move it to the side. Splitter, right? Yes. So this header component, again, as a prop name, that's what basically we are sending here, right? And the name gets printed on a welcome to, and then a name. And that part is this part here. As we can see, there is on our app, we have a div and then another div, which is the 2 components that we are returning. Then the top one as a class header that we are putting here as class name. That's translated, of course. And then it has a h1 title and a p. So h1 and a p tag. So here we are using the use effect hook just to create a timeout that basically updates every second. Now the magic in quotes behind it, why is it updating every second, is because every time we change the state of this of a component, the entire component re-renders again. And every time the component renders, everything inside of it gets triggered again. But it's so fast that you don't see. Like you cannot see that. You should never see that because that would be a bit crazy to see. And that's the reason why we are setting the second plus 1 every second. Because again, we learned for loops, right? When you go first element, the index is 0. Second element, the index is 1. Third element, the index is 2. But you are incrementing it so that you can actually go, right? You are doing I++ or something plus plus, so that you can go forward on your loop. Yeah. It's very, very similar what's happening here. So we render the component and we say like, oh, this component has a div header, h1 p, and closes the div and returns this. But there's also something here happening. So the use effect basically triggers this function because this is a function, right? Inside the highlighted part. From here to here is a function. So when it renders, it triggers that function. And now what we have to ask is what happens inside of the function? So inside of a function, we have a set timeout. And again, the set timeout will run whatever is inside of itself every after x, and that x is 1 second. So the component renders, 1 second after we say, oh, set seconds to this. And the set seconds is a state. So basically what we are saying like, oh, did 1 second pass? Yes, now update the state. And by updating the state, it means that we re-render everything again. The whole thing gets re-rendered again. But the prop did not change because it's still Git home from here, it's still Git home. The only thing that changed in the whole render is the seconds, because we said that set seconds to whatever value was before plus 1. And that's why this one keeps incrementing, but nothing else is changing, because we are not, again, it's something that it's very weird because we don't see it here. Nothing is changing here, right? But the component is re-rendering every time, every second, re-render, re-render, re-render. It's just that basically React is comparing to what was I before, what was the component before, what is it now? So before was seconds equals 287, and now seconds 288. So update that part only. That's why it's not updating everything.
But can we do that to a button, or just like we can set it by seconds?
So
yeah, you.
So pretty much it re-renders the difference between the previous state
Yes.
and the new state.
Yes.
If you have, like, let's say, right now you only have one number that's
Yeah.
actually re-rendering
Yeah.
because it's the second. But if you had something like the name, it would change like 10 names. Every 10 times it would put every second would change that name, those names until go back to the first name again or something like that.
Yeah, yes, it's exactly. The only thing that we see change is because we are only changing that. That's why we only see that change. Now, we can put this anywhere. The truth is that, and to answer yours, we don't need the timeout. The only reason why we have a timeout here is because we want to change it every second. So if we remove the timeout, for instance, now, what's going to happen is that React will render, and it will say like, oh, what's the value for seconds? And the value for seconds is 0. That's the first value for seconds. But then the use effect says like, oh, by the way, set seconds to whatever value it is plus 1. And then it updates. So it will stay there because there is nothing else is changing. Oh, yeah. In here is because we probably need this, and I will explain this part. Use effect. Where do they have it? The cleanup. Where do they have it? Yeah. This part is what can make your app break if you don't tell it to do things only once, for instance. And I can show you something really hardcore that you can do on the website.
I tried to render a list, and he crashed and said, well, React is preventing you to do that because it prevents you to do an infinite loop.
Yeah.
And it was like,
yeah, exactly, because you're changing it all the time. Because again, use effect, if you don't tell it to stop, and that's basically what this empty bracket means. That's why, for instance, now we don't even see it because it gets 1 right away. But if we do this, now it will just, as you can imagine, go a bit crazy, and probably there is an error because it exceeds. Probably you got something like this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't remember. It was actually on Cold Sandbox. It just kind of like he stopped because I was trying to do that with that list.
yeah, it can go very, very, very crazy. And the reason is because we change the state, and by changing the state means update the whole component again, and the whole component means this whole function, and this whole function means use effect will run. So it's like, it's not an infinite loop, but you can see it as an infinite. It's something that it's always happening, because we are changing state. But if in here we would not change state, if we would just console log here, okay, Now, is it fresh? Yeah. Now, for instance, it only did it once, right? If we set the state, and again, we don't even need to set it to, yeah, we need to set it to something different. As you can see now, it's going to go a bit crazy and my browser will die soon if I don't stop it. And that's why this use effect is a little bit tricky, but in compensation, we don't have to use, where were they? Come on. Yeah. Not will and mount. That's not the one. Yeah. But in compensation, we don't need to use two. And that's because that's the problem of the class component, is that we need to check, did it mount? And if so, then update the state. And then did it update? And if so, then does things again. So the use effect basically does those two combined for us. That's why it's really, really tricky to understand exactly what's happening. And sometimes you can end up on an infinite loop, or your React application goes crazy and does not understand what's going on. But yeah. But again, the use effect, yes, can be used for this example, because this is not harming the application, because it's actually making a wait 1 second, now update, wait 1 second, now update. So this won't go on an infinite loop. This will just go on an infinite number. Eventually it will stop, and that's okay with it. But the main, it's not the main, but the one that you will use mostly, use effect, is to fetch data. To fetch data from some API. And that's the example I have here that I can show you. So I will close the header component now, and I'll open the repositories. Compared to previous week, or for instance on the homework, you had to have a local or a static version of the to-dos. And that's basically what I had with my repos. So I had them written here. But usually that's not how you develop an app. Usually you have an API somewhere with the data that comes from a database or whatever. So I'm not passing it to the repositories anymore as a prop. I'm just saying, give me whatever repositories renders. Now, repositories, this component got very big, but we will try to understand what's happening here. As you can see in here, I have 3 use states for 3 different ideas of states. So the first one, we already had it on a previous example, which was the repository list. But what we were doing is that we would get a repos array here, and then we would send it. We would set it as the state. We would say repos as the first, as the initial value of the of this repository list. But now, because we want data from an API, and I'm using the GitHub API here, which is public, and you can always, as long as you pass your username there, you get all your repositories here that are public. So this is completely fine to use. So, oh, sorry, where was I? Yeah. And I just have it here as a plain URL here. Now, try to ignore this if you can. I'll close it so we don't have to talk about it. And these two. Oh, come on. Cannot close the whole thing. That's stupid. It's okay. So in here, we are looping through the repository list and doing exactly the same that we were doing before, rendering a repository component and giving the props. There is some new props that I will explain, but you don't have to worry with those right now. But we are doing exactly the same thing. Now, this repository list, as you can see all the way up here, its initial value is empty, right? Mm-hmm. So I will just comment this out so that you will see what will happen, probably here. Now, there is no list here. And the reason is because, well, it's it's empty, right? As a first value, like we can see the div here, I can just put,
You still have the equals as a prop on the top of the function.
yeah, but we are not using it, so it's okay. We can just put a class here saying repository list. This is just so that we actually see it. So here it's completely empty because there's basically nothing there, right? But what's happening here in our use effect, inside of it I have a function and this function you should probably know already. I'll comment also this out, and actually I'll do this. So this function is an async function that does a fetch of this URL, which is defined all the way up here, and then the fetch returns a promise. So you always need to do then, and then the response, and response.json. I'm not sure if you did this on a node, but that's how to fetch data from some APIs. Again,
Isn't you need do then on fetch?
yeah, eventually you have to do it somewhere because you need to resolve the promise that it returns. So that, for instance, in here I have this result constant now, that it's basically the result of whatever happens there, and I'm console logging it here. And now if we open our console, we refresh, and we can see that in here comes all the same data that was on the API, on this API. Now, again, this is happening inside of a use effect. And
but what if you use direct? Say if you use this because assigns, it's just like to wait a time until you get the data. What if you use direct fetch?
There is not such thing as that, because you always need to wait for a response.
Well,
Okay, so this is what we learned, like about fetch direct.
I read somewhere that if you don't use a single wait, what would happen in your page will go blank.
Yeah, because it won't.
Because it's waiting for the data to come in.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Because
I always use assigns.
Yeah, we always need to, at least. I mean, you don't have to do this because technically, and again, this might be, a bit unreadable.
No, I understand it here what you mean by it, because I know how it's fetch working. It's just like my question is like if I don't do the wait things.
But that's what I'm saying. You don't have to. If you handle all your data inside of the then. So, for instance, in here we. Sorry, I forgot to console log response.json. Isn't it the same exact thing? Yeah, okay. Because, yeah, in here, again, you would always have to do temp.then. Now in here, there is the response. Yeah, so I will just mark it as inside promise, and this one is outside wait. So as you can see, we can access the data without awaiting, but we are not doing that in reality. As you can see in here, we have exactly the same data, but the main difference is that this result is saying like, oh, wait for all this data to be, for this promise to be resolved, and give me the data of it. And then inside of here we have a then that has response.json, and we return that. and it resolves it, so it returns the plain result as we want. But if we don't want to have all these things, we can always do our logic here, because in here, so we have then response, now response.json, which is also a promise, so we need to resolve that with the then. The main reason why usually people use this is because it makes it a bit cleaner, and it's not inside of two then, but it's doing exactly the same thing. That's why sometimes you might not see any await, because if you are doing all your logic down here, it works fine. There is no difference. It's just, again, it's a way of working with promises, which can always be very, very tricky. I tend to fail them very often. Of what every time that there is a promise within a promise within a promise, that's always painful to work with. But that happens sometimes.
Marco, so the outside function of the await is async. So what if you don't have the get data? Automatically, you will just fetch.
No, wait. Let me just remove this thing here and return response.json. You mean?
Yeah, I don't need the get data anymore. I just need the const result. And how would I put the async part?
Oh, if you want, that's always what's tricky. If you want an await, you always need to be inside of an async.
Okay.
That's how things
So
work.
I will just create an async function first,
Yes.
and then inside I will call await.
And that's basically what I did here. Is that so? I mean, in here again, technically, I could have a very long fetch URL .then whatever all there. It's just that since we are doing this part, and this part I can define it as async, the get data one. Then in here I just call it. But for instance, if we would do this, but then we would have to return the result, and probably we need this one. Then we would have to do the then here on the get data, because again we are not resolving the promise yet, and we have to if we want what's inside of it. So this
How would you know that the promise is not yet resolved?
by console log,
That's
basically.
the only way.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you inspect the fetch, for instance, it returns a promise. So it means you have to resolve it.
How did you do that, Marco?
Command or control, click on it.
Oh.
It should send you to the definition of the again, these functions exist in JavaScript.
Yes.
So in here, it's an easy way to see it. Also, if you hover the mouse,
Yes.
it's not that readable because of the screen, but you can see like, oh, it takes an input as request info, and optional request in it, and then it returns a promise. So that means it needs to be resolved, basically.
What
So-
was end for?
Uh,
Like info and then end?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Can you show a glimpse again of the get home?
Yeah, wait, let me just make sure we have async here. This one? Yeah.
No, the get home on the code.
Oh, yeah, here.
So the repos. Okay, so the repositories is
Yeah.
is blank.
Yeah, these ones do not exist. I just commented them out to explain, but they do not exist. So now they come from an API.
Okay.
And that's basically what we are doing here. So in here, on this result, we have the repositories here. And again, as you can see, there is a lot of data you can have, but I'm still just only asking for the name and the description. And that exists here, so it matches and nobody complains.
If that's the case, Marco, you don't need also the repos for the parameter on the repositories, or because you don't have it on the Git home. Where you
Oh yeah, no, this one is not needed here.
How would you know if you will need a state or a props? How would you determine?
Yeah. So how to explain that?
Yeah, actually.
That's a very hard thing to explain. But you can imagine props would be a structure. Let's say imagine you have an apartment or you have a house, The props is this room exists.
Mhm.
So there is 3 rooms that exist. You cannot change that, right? I mean, you can tear walls down, but then it's no longer the structure that you had. But you can change what's inside. That's state. So, for instance, if you want to change something, how to explain? If you want to change something that it's not the initial value of it, and again, the most common ones would be a counter, right? So a counter always starts at 0. So 0 is a prop. But then every time you click, you want to count up or down, depend where. So that's state, because you are changing something. Because you cannot change props, then you need to basically extend the prop, which is that's not true, but you make a copy of the prop into state, and you work that one, because state you can always change to whatever you want.
So basically, the props is just a read-only
Yeah.
part of the component.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Basically.
So you can dynamically create a state
Mhm.
within the component, not
Yes.
really putting it or directly coding it on the
Yeah.
component itself.
Yeah. And that's
Can
why.
can we say that the prop is would be an initial value of a state?
It can, but it doesn't have to. And that's for instance why this header here.
I mean, if you want to change the value of that prop, then it will become an initial value.
Yeah.
But it's not necessary,
For instance,
because it can also be used as a static value
What mean initial?
without changing.
this one, let's remove the timer so we don't.
Oh, cool. What mean initial, Ricardo? Initial. The word initial. What mean?
It's when you start the start of something. So the initial value as a counter equal to 0, so the start value of counter is 0, or the initial value of counter is 0.
The initial value of an empty array is nothing.
The
It's
original one.
empty.
Okay.
Now I'll put a button here. Set title to new title. Okay, so now we have 2 welcome to Git home, and welcome to is hard coded here. Git home is being passed as a prop on a Git home here. So what I'm doing here on our header is that basically I'm saying, but as you can see, both of them have a different value here. So one of them gets the value from the prop name, it's from there. The other one gets the value from title. Title is from state, use state. But the initial value of title is name, which is the one from the prop. Right? That's why both of them are the same. When we land on a page and we look at them, both of them say welcome to GitHub, Git home, because we are passing Git home. If we, for instance, we change here, welcome to, if we say Git room, both of them say Git room, because this is the prop. So right now, we are actually using both prop, which is name, and state, which is title. Now down here, I have a button. And on click, when I click the button, I will say set title with this value, new title. Now, whenever we click on it, as you see, only one of them updated, right? The reason is the prop is still the same. We did not change. We cannot change the prop actually. That's impossible to change the prop. So this one is the same, but this one uses the state. So we are saying like, oh, before was whatever was coming from there, but now I want this. So it changed. And again, this is the main difference between props and state. That state, you can always change it. You can always modify it because you have access to it. Props, you can only use. So saying that props is read-only, that's the truth. Like that's how it is, basically. You cannot change them.
It's like reassigning a new value to a variable.
Yeah. Yeah, and a variable that you can work with,
Right.
basically. Because, for instance, we can do this, right? We can new title equals name, right? And now we have so now only one changed, but now we have a new what's it called? A new variable on this, in this case constant. But if we want to change it, so now in here this needs to be a function, so we can do more than one operation basically. And new title equals now the other one did not change, right? Even though I will maybe move this out so it's a bit easier to understand. A handle button, this is a function.
Set title is a function, right?
Yeah. Yeah, set title is a function that we defined for the state.
So using that line number 8, so it just returns the parameter right away if you would recreate the function set title.
What do you mean? This one?
Yeah, it returns the parameter right away because if as shown on the website, it automatically prints the
Yeah. Yeah, in here what we are saying is that, because again, this set title, we define it here. We gave it the name. So what we are saying is the value of this set title, which is title, now put this on it.
In this case, we just update the parameter. We can say it in this way.
Yeah. So now, as you can see, now on a click event, right? Because I basically just moved what was down there to a function on itself. Now on a click, I'm putting the set title to new title, and this new title here, which is a complete independent variable, I'm also trying to update that, right? That's basically what I'm trying to do here. But when I click, you can actually see that that one got the new value, but it did not got it here. It didn't, nothing changed here. Maybe I will have a bit side by side, and I'll put this one here so we can actually try to understand what the hell is going on. Oh no, that's not so smart. So, and I mean, I will save and refresh again just to show. And in here we are still console logging, right? So now when we click the button, we are saying set the title, which is that title, which is being printed on the first welcome. Set it to new title, and it did. And then we are saying new title, and this is a variable here that had the value of the product. We are saying this is equal to this is new, and it's being printed here. Even though when we console log, right after, you can see like the value is there, but nothing happened there because we are not changing the state. We are just changing a variable name. So for React, that means I don't have to update because you're doing some calculations that it's not state related. So this does not have to update at all. That's the reason why to change something, we need to use state. We cannot just assign a variable to something and then use that variable. No, we have to use state. That's exactly why those functions are called use, because that's what we have to do.
But why is it on the document of the React it says that you need to be careful to use a lot of state in your application as much as possible?
Yeah, you need to be careful because, again, every time you change the state, it updates the component. So if the component has children,
Okay.
because it updates the component, it says re-render again. Something changed on the state, you have to re-render. Then, because it re-renders, it triggers all the children to re-render as well. So for instance, if you are doing a set state in a most parent component, your application keeps updating every time you do something. And the best example is to have a sub header here that we will return a div hey. Yeah, but we should also return a console log. So we will return h1 hey. And somewhere here so when we will just subheader. Why isn't it not there? Okay, first, again, React already helps you with when using state. If you set it to the same value as it was before, it won't re-update. So for instance, we are console log here, right? So every time we click the button, it console logs, basically. So the this is new keeps being updated because we are clicking the button. But we are not updating the state because the value is the same. It will always be the same. But if we make it so that it will always append something, so it will be the string. Basically what we are saying there is that the string new title is going to be equals to new title plus 1. So every time we will click, we probably should use concat with the string. Right? This probably.
Well, the new title will be a variable in the class.
Well, it is logging it though.
Yeah, but what's logging is here. Yeah, because we would have to have it outside a new. Oh, I can use temp title equals title plus 1, and now here we will say temp title. Oh, yeah. Now it keeps adding because we are saying it's the previous value plus 1, so it just adds 1. And as you can see, but now I actually don't want this one here, so we don't get a bit corrupted. As you can see, every time I click, this one gets printed. It did before, but we are also changing the state of the application, so it gets re-rendered every time. That's basically what is happening here. Now the problem of re-render something every time, and that's what people say it's really, you need to be careful of using a lot of state. It's because in here, so we are changing the state every time someone clicks the button, right? And we already know that this one does not work, the assigning a variable, so I'll just clean up a bit. But now our component as a child component, which basically has it renders some component. So whenever we refresh the page, as you can see, it prints out child component rendered, which is being console log here on a subheader. So now, if we change this state, as you saw, child component render again, and again, and again, and again. So now imagine if child component also has a child component, then that one also gets everything gets re-rendered. So that's why it's a bit unsafe. But again, unsafe is not the right word. It's more like you need to be careful what you're doing, because by updating the state, you might be updating the whole component tree, which might be very bad for performance.
But what if you really need to change the data?
Then that's fine. Yeah, but that's completely fine. For instance, let's say if you are fetching data from an API and you want to refresh every 2 seconds, right? Because new values might be there.
Yes.
Then it means that the whole website needs to update, basically, because you are using content everywhere. So that's fine. Then there's no problem with that. It's just that you need to be aware that you're doing that.
Okay.
That's the only reason why people say you need to be really, really careful with state, is that you need to be aware why are you using state. You're using state because you want to change something on your component.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is a cost for that, and the cost means if your component has children, they will update as well.
So like for example in Facebook, when you are on the mobile and make you refresh for the screen, so it's loading.
Yeah.
And that what happened exactly.
Yeah, but for instance, in there, you can actually see that none of the rest updates. Only that part is updating, which means that only that component, and that component contains a lot of components, but all that is updating. But again, they could have that on a parent, but then the whole website would update, and that's a bit cost. That take a long time to refresh. So the further you can have your state, the better.
And state use state as asynchronous, right?
No. No, it's just a regular function. I mean, again, you can try to understand what's written on the documentation, which might not be that easy.
Okay.
But it's just a regular function that this is what returns. So how to explain this? So basically, and again, you give it an initial state as parameter, and then it returns you that initial state. That's basically what this S is saying, plus a set state action. And that's why you can name them. That's why sometimes it's really, really tricky, because before on the class components, you would only use the word set. Was it set state? Yeah, something like that.
Set state.
But right now you can use whatever word you define, because actually this doesn't have to be set title. It can be update title. Then we just need to make sure we have it everywhere else. This works fine. You can name it whatever you want, basically. And that's what can be a little bit confusing, because again, when you look at my repositories one, there is a lot of use states here. But again, I'm using it for specific things for itself. So I actually want to use as many as I need. So again, it's a bit of a trade-off when you read about like, oh, you should not use a lot of state, but if you need it, then you should.
So it renders, what if you have multi-state that you need to render? So they will render all at once, or they will render one by one?
It's from parent to children.
What if the header is a different component and the body is a different component, and each of them has things to render, so they will...
They won't clash. So for instance, actually I can show you here. So in here I'm gonna have a console log. This is repository res file. So this one happens when the repositories gets rendered.
Yes.
This one happens when the header gets rendered.
Okay.
But as you can see here, they are rendered side by side.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not dependent on each other. So as you can see, repositories file appears here, but now whenever I update the header, the repositories file didn't get touched because it's next to it, is not underneath it. And that's the best way actually to divide your components, is that if you don't want them to interfere, then they should not be part of parents and children. They should live next to each other. That's why, for instance,
And the innermost get updated first, or the outermost? Like the parent first get updated, or the children first?
it's whoever gets triggered. So for instance, if a child, I can actually show that. So on a header, so let's say we have we also have a name here. Title. Okay, this is starting to be a bit confusing to read. Why doesn't it format automatically? And now in here we'll have a button. And this one here, we will just do it directly. Update title to new subtitle. So, for instance, this one is updating this, and the child component gets re-rendered, but it still says hey. So now, whenever we click here, this one updated, but nothing happened on a parent, because the subheader is dependent on a parent, but whatever changes happen there, it won't communicate with, the communication never goes up, always goes down. So that's why, again, if you need a lot of state, if it's at the most child component, that's okay, because nothing crazy will happen, because the communication always goes down, never goes up. And okay, I will maybe also log this one here. Parent. We don't
Did
have.
you say that when you say that never goes up, so whatever the children is doing, the parent is not affected?
It's not notified by it. I will remove the console log from here so we have a more clear understanding of what's going on. So parent component render, child component render. Parent component is this, including the button. Child component is this. It doesn't look that pretty, but that's what happens. So now if I change this title, both of them got re-rendered.
Yes.
But if I change this one, only the child got re-rendered. And I should maybe do exactly the same as we were doing here, just so that we have the same exact effect. Yeah. Okay, so when we are clicking here, only child component gets re-rendered. But now if we click here, both of them got, because it's a parent. And the parent changed, which means re-render. And part of that render is a child. So the child also has to re-render because, again, React does not keep that information.
Can you refresh again? Because just can you click that one first? Yeah.
So if we click here, both of them renders.
No, but hi, it's not changing.
No, it renders. It did not update its state. And by render means it's the first render.
First state.
Yeah, whatever state is.
Yeah.
Because if we update hey, now it's hey1.
Okay.
And now if we change the parent, it's still hey1, but it still got re-rendered.
Yeah. No, yeah, I get you now.
It's because we are not passing the title as a prop. We are using the title as a state. So it kind of stays on that value for a while, and then does it need to update? No, but it has to re-render because the parent did. So and that's why it can be costly, because again, if you have a lot of children, all of them get re-rendered for no reason because nothing changed on them, basically.
It's like the CSS hierarchy, you know, it just goes, it trickles down.
Yeah. But yeah, I know it's really it is a bit tricky, but again, the console log, and I would if you put a console log like this inside of your return function on your component, saying, for instance, subheader renders, or because then you know what's happening every time, and then you can see like, oh, this component is being rendered for no reason, probably because I'm doing something that gets triggered by it. That's a very easy way to see what's happening around your code.
I have a very complex question.
Sure.
Regarding the set timeout,
Yeah.
if ever you have a button that says start and it will start the timeout, and if you want to pause, how will you able to grab the specific value of that timeout? Like when it's 12, then I pause, then it stops at 12, and then when I click on start again, then it will begin. How would I capture the value and then proceed, continue on?
Yeah, you would have to combine a state and a effect.
Use effect.
Yeah. Or technically, you would need two states, one to keep the value, and another one to stop, to pause or not the timeout.
So should I update the one that is continuing, or I just assume that it is stopped, but behind it's still counting?
No, you can actually stop it completely.
So if it's ever it's a set timeout, I will clear timeout, and then what if I want to proceed again? Can I pass the value?
Yeah, you could do something, for instance, or let's start at true. With 0. So basically, we would have one that says, is it running or not? So that we can pause.
Yeah.
And then we would have some button somewhere that say, pause it, which on click, basically it would call the set running. And in here we'll do a tricky thing, which is very helpful, which we will set running to a negative of whatever it is. So if it's true, we set it to false. If it's false, we set it to true. This is the easiest way to use an on-off button, because again, it's either true or false. Yeah. So if we always negate it, we are always setting the new value that we want every time we click. So we don't have to check, was it true? If so, put false. No, we don't. That would be crazy to do. So we can use this shortcut. Now we will have a use effect here. Wrong room.
Wrong room again.
Same room.
Same wrong room.
And now a set timeout here.
That's actually the matrix, you know, deja vu. The cat goes there. So it gets just like it.
Value plus 1, right? Wasn't it something like that we had?
Yeah.
Now we just need probably to print the value so we can actually see value. Oh yeah, now we have a lot of stuff happening here. That's why.
Many re-renders. That's what I.
Yeah.
That's what I got. That's exactly what I got.
Where could we? do it. Let's kill the name for now. Title. Where do we have title somewhere? Oh, here. Let's kill this one. We don't need it. We don't need it. Okay. Will this one work? No. Then we can. Yeah, on header line 18. Oh. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, now the posit is actually not doing anything. So if then in here we would have to have a running. Does that? Now it stopped.
Yeah, how can you continue?
Else.
Oh, is it because of this one? No, this one we actually need. So, okay, if I do it.
Maybe you should make it like just negative if it's not.
But why this one still gives the
But
re-renders?
after it is paused, the last value should still continue.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we probably also need it here, I guess. 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah.
Can you do that?
Yes.
Did
I
it
will.
pause?
I'll just put a bit faster so we can actually see it pausing. So now it paused in 5, and now if you click again, it will continue. So what's happening here, and this is actually a very cool use case for use effect. So we have two states, right? One with a is it running or not, and a function to change that value, and another one with a value, which we could call it time instead of value, and a function to change it. And we started at 0. So basically what will happen is that the use effect will get triggered and it will say if running is true, and it is true from start, then do this, and it will always do that. But then somewhere here we say like, oh, put running to whatever it wasn't, which means in the first case, put it to false. So when we do this, the value of running changed. And that's why we are sending them here. So basically, this is telling the use effect run or execute the function if any of them changed.
Okay.
And that's why when we did not have the running, we only had value. Before, it would not go back, restart it again, because so we changed it. And meanwhile, the use effect has a timeout, so it's updating the state, but it's only updating the set value. And because we only changed this one, it actually got the false, so it didn't do it. But because we did not say like, oh, if this one changes, keep doing whatever the hell you were doing before. So basically, both states, in this use case, both states need to affect the use effect. That's why we need to pass them here.
So the value of the value is retained on the use effect.
Yeah, I mean, technically it's retained in the component level, but yeah, because it says like, oh, value did not change because it's paused, right?
Yes.
But running changed, so run the use effect again. So,
okay.
And that's what's tricky because like you have one that changed, the other one that doesn't change, and that's exactly the point you were saying, like, oh, you can never turn it back again because you can pause it, but like now, who do you need to tell to change? That's where use effect comes handy, because you say like, if any of them changes, run again.
It's only a forward movement. It's a forward action.
Yeah.
You cannot reverse that.
Yeah, and then of course, if we do this, then
If You change the
it
post,
continues,
does not-
it paused, it's true, it's not there, but now
It doesn't go in.
nothing happens because what it's saying, like, oh, value is still the same, so I don't need to update anything.
Only the post.
Yeah. So actually, this is a very, very good case for use effect.
Yes,
Mm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if I don't pass the parameter, if I don't use the value and running, or I don't use a parameter for use effect, it will run forever.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a dangerous one. So if you
So-
actually don't send any, it only runs once, because that's basically what empty brackets means. It's like do it once only. I think that's probably actually what they are saying here. Yeah.
So if we set for 2, it will run 2. If we set 3, it will run 3.
No. You set for how many types of state you want to. For instance, if we don't set anything, actually, if we just say it like this, this will continue forever.
Yeah, so it's working.
But-
that's not.
But the problem of this one is that you do not have control on a use effect to really. I mean, right now you do because you have two states only. But this one is very tricky to tell use effect when to stop and when not to stop, because if something else happened, and by something else, like you have another click event, that might trigger. So if you pass the states that you say, like,
Okay.
only if any of these two changed,
So
now
for
you
example,
change.
if I set it with all these parameters and I click any button in the app, it will also update.
Would you like
It
to
can,
do
not necessarily, but it depends what those buttons are doing.
Okay, if this button, like for example, count one more for anything else in the
Yeah, then because it says like, oh,
Yeah, you mentioned.
the whole app needs to update, then it updates everything.
Just throw out the copy.
Okay.
So, for instance, yeah, let's have this. So, no, I will do one thing, which is I will copy this whole thing, and I'll go all the way back. So, now of course this one will fail. Oh, these ones are duplicated. And we add something like this, right? So it works the pause and continue, but because we are, if we do this, now we are not telling the use effect to do or not do whenever only one of these one changes. But we have another state here present on the web on the whole thing. So we pause it and it should stop somewhere. But now we change title. Oh, it actually keeps the same value. Okay. It should continue to update. Mm. So pause.
Is it only in your browser that you have the components?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because in here you can actually see what's the actual value on some things.
What browser are you using?
I will explain that. I'm just trying to understand what's happening here. So this one updates title. Oh yeah, it's because the update title is actually not part of the use effect. So actually in this case doing this or doing this would actually have the same effect.
It's not what's inside user effect.
Yeah, exactly. Because use effect, it's only actually changing one of them and checking the other. But the update title is completely separate. So it actually won't collide with each other. Yeah, so this is not the browser, but there is something called React Chrome extension, but it does not have to be for Chrome. There is also for Firefox, for whatever. It's actually, yeah, React Developer Tools. So if you install this on your browser, whenever you are inspecting your code, so in here you have regular elements, right?
Yeah.
But then somewhere here you'll have something called components. And this actually shows you what components, like the name of the components you wrote on your React. So you can actually, and you can also see the state, what's happening there. So for instance, in here we can actually see that that state keeps updating. There is a problem with the names. As you can see, like we don't know, we only see that state git room, state true, and state, we don't really know what they are.
Can I use that in any website?
Yeah, yeah, any website that uses React, this will be available. For instance, the React website, actually, then it creates this logo here, that it means that this website uses React. That's why if we go to GitHub, for instance, this is not on because GitHub does not use React. They use something else, whatever. So if you actually inspect the React website, in here you can see all the components that they have. But usually it's very, very unreadable because they are using the production build as we talked last class. And we are using the development one. So development one makes everything easy because it's for the developer to understand what's going on. And the production one is to be as fast as possible, so it doesn't have to be pretty. And it's not, as you can see. So it's not that easy to actually understand what's going on. But again, this is not like a how to say, like a security thing or whatever, because all the JavaScript you use on your website is public. It has to be public because so that your website can run. So anyone can actually see what code you have. I mean,
but it's like built in a different way or something like that, so you can't look at it when it's in production.
No, it's just so that it's optimized to be fast, so it's not humanly readable. But I mean, there are actually tools that you can just give the optimized version and it transforms into readable version. But the only reason why is so that the website is fast, and it's not like, because again, having all these lines on your code causes space on your file, right? Your file gets bigger, even if it's just empty lines. Your file size gets bigger, and if your file size is very big, then the app is not fast to run because it needs to download the whole thing. That's why there is that optimized. That's why you use the build version for production and the development version for development.
Because they strip everything that's unnecessary.
Yeah, whatever is not needed, whatever is only for helping something, or it's stripped away. Okay, now I will remove this part from here. Okay, this one still works, we don't care. Now I would like to talk about, or should we make a pause and then talk about the fetching data and inputs, because that's something we need to talk about. So we'll make a pause now.